Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching The Naturalist Capitalist. I am your host, Reed Coverdale, and I've got David Spuria back on the show again. How's it going, Dave?
It's going all right. Reed, how about yourself?
It's going pretty good. I look back through my videos, and I've had you on with Charles and Mike, but I haven't had just you on since last July, which is quite a while. But when you came on last July, you had been dabbling in a few different political philosophies. You'd gone from Tulsi to hopefully Jesse Ventura, and then hopefully Justin Amash, and then it didn't work out. So then you kind of went with Howie Hawkins and the Green Party, and you had just wiped your hands clean of that. You said, there's no way this is for me. And you were kind of looking for something. So I was trying to bring you over to libertarianism, and it was a crazy year. But why don't you just tell us about how that political journey went, what got you into Tulsi, and then how it went from there, and then the different types of people you met in those different political camps.
Yeah. Well, obviously it started with Tulsi, as you mentioned, but obviously Tulsi wasn't going anywhere in the Democratic Party. And I knew that. I kind of just, it was kind of like, you just know something bad's going to happen. And, you know, between all of the censorship that went on and just trying to keep her away from people hearing whatever she was going to say. And her party is just corruption. I mean, both parties are corrupt, but if I were going to give an edge, I'd say the Democratic Party is the most corrupt party. Going through the whole thing, then you start to look for an alternative. And I used to tell people, hey, you know, if you like Tulsi on these issues, maybe the Green Party, you know. And I even interviewed Howie Hawkins at one point on my channel, and interesting, smart guy, no question about it. But I found that the philosophy in and of itself really requires insane amounts of government, like just and they say, well, we're going to have centralized control at the very local level, and it's kind of going to be like your Rotary Club. Everybody shows up, and to me, it seemed very disorganized and very unrealistic and very fringe. You know, the more I just got into it, I'm thinking, this ain't going to appeal to some guy, no offense to you, Reed, who drives a truck, right? Who's just like trying to make ends meet. And that's the example I used. I think even before I really got to know you, I said, you know, working class folks are just, you know, you can tell them that you're for them, but the way you present this, it just seems like very narrow and it doesn't have that broad appeal that, say, Tulsi brought, or even, you know, Trump for a while had this, you know, he manufactured this coalition of, hey, I'm not for Wall Street, I'm for Main Street, and that sort of thing. But, you know, as I went on, you know, I started to explore, thanks to you and a few other people, more libertarian ideas. And look, you know, I'm kind of this open-ended thing, and I've gone all over the place last year. And it was a real weird year, just with everything that happened during the election and how that went down. And I'm still thinking we still need to repair the infrastructure before we're able to drive on the road. And we're going to have to figure that out before the next election for sure. And we're going to have people, especially if you're an outsider looking at the election, that if you're from a third party and you're present as a poll watcher or something, you're going to have a target on your back. It's bad enough that Republicans were kicked out of certain places and couldn't see what was going on. But imagine being a libertarian or a Green Party person and saying, hey, I want to see how the cake's being baked today, you know, and they're saying, no, right. Sorry, you have no standing here, like the court said. And that's where it gets real crazy for me. I basically, it's like a drunk that had too much politics. I blacked out for a while, and I was like, there's no recourse. There's no, like, what do we do to beat this system. And then, you know, in recovery, basically after a few weeks of consuming probably the wrong media, to be honest with you, I decided that I think libertarians have the best ideas. Are they perfect? I don't know if they're perfect, but they're still, it's kind of like when people say, well, you know, capitalism is flawed. And I say it's still better than socialism. It's still better than the alternative. I mean, you can look around the world where this system is tried and then this other system is tried, and you have a laboratory and you could say, well, this system works better. It's the same in South Dakota right now, where there haven't been lockdowns and restrictions, and people in South Dakota are doing fine, and their economy is open and people have jobs and their unemployment rate is low. So you didn't destroy the economy in the name of like fake science or questionable science at the very least. So my political journey has brought me to the point now where I'm reading books by Ron Paul. I am watching Tom Woods fairly religiously each day. Had some great interviews this past week. Got me really excited about being fervently anti-war, which I am, always have been. One of the reasons I like Tulsi and Howie Hawkins to some degree is that they claim to be anti-war. Tulsi likes to talk about regime change wars. I would probably broaden that, say I think we need to look at wars that aren't necessarily regime change oriented or involvement that we have. Some people use different words to kind of mask it, make it sound like it's, you know, we're just going out for the military's going out for a little errand and they'll be back soon. Don't worry about it. And the problem is we've been doing that for about 50 years, 60 years, just throwing the military out in various places and they never come home. So as morally speaking, whether you're agnostic, atheist, Christian, whatever, you've got to think to yourself, how much of this is too much? And are we an empire, which I couldn't accept for quite a long time, but I believe that we're an empire. And we seem to thrive on that power. And no matter who gets into the White House, you know, one of the things I realized about Trump recently is that, yeah, he had plenty of opportunities to scale it back. He didn't scale it back he talked about scaling it back, and he talked some really good rhetoric, and he had me convinced, but in reality, not a whole lot really changed. Yeah, he didn't start a war per se, but he did ramp up a lot of activities when he first got in there in Afghanistan, in the war on terror, which, again, it doesn't seem to have an end point. And he, you know, he did campaign on knocking the hell out of ISIS. That's what he said. And people were still kind of convinced from the past 15, 20 years that we needed to knock out ISIS. And I'm at the point now where this is just all like, you need to audit, you know how you need to audit the Federal Reserve? You need to audit the military industrial complex and what we're doing, what our involvement is. In fact, it would probably be a more fruitful audit than the Fed. We kind of know what's going on at the Fed, but you know, the Pentagon, was it 3-4 years ago, claimed to lose $6.5 trillion. They lost it. It's gone. And they put that out there as an actual news story. So right now, I don't think I've been as, I want to say confident, but I feel comfortable as a libertarian. I don't have my card. It arrived in the mail a few days ago. I was going to do a big video about, show everybody I got my libertarian party. I'm a card-carrying Florida
libertarian. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a crazy. I'm not just a libertarian in name. I'm not a lino. Okay. Right. I am a member of the party. I don't expect anybody to show up here with a, you know, libertarian little, I don't know, Statue of Liberty thing I can put on my head, but I think I feel good. I think it's a tough, but I'll be honest with you, Reed. One of the reasons I want to do this video with you is when I look out on the political landscape, I hear a lot about, you know, conservatism is a big thing. Populism is a big thing. People are kind of fed up with a two-party system. They want to be independent, but the libertarians over the years have been branded as, like, you know, the crazy uncle who says a lot of funny and interesting things, But then when, it comes down to brass tacks, I think of Gary Johnson not knowing anything about Aleppo, which, a lot of the apologists at the time for him said, well, what he does know is that we need to bring our troops home from there. We shouldn't be fighting a war there. We've got to be better. If we're smart, which I think, if you listen to Tom Woods every day, or whoever your libertarian, whether you're just, waiting for the Mises Institute to put out their stuff, or you've got another brand of libertarianism that you kind of follow, Ron Paul, whoever, we've got to do better at being engaged in these issues. I think you've done a great job, by the way, on Twitter, YouTube. Your conversation with Kim Iverson was fascinating. That was good TV from a political philosophy junkie standpoint, because I'm listening to her when she's talking about how the military is the only branch of government that or part of government that does things really well. And I like Kim. I think Kim's a commentator, and she's smart and she's passionate, but wow. That was
I feel the same way. I have nothing but respect for her, mostly just because of her opposition to the lockdowns. It's just amazing from a progressive commentator. But when she said that thing about the military, I had to try not to laugh. And then the other thing was, I could have argued that whole video about healthcare, but I wanted to get to the other stuff. And that was a great interview. And I wanted to ask you about what you thought of not so much the ideologies, but the people you found in those groups. Because Kim Iverson was a Tulsi supporter, and she is very cordial, very kind, very open, very willing to talk to anybody. She doesn't demonize anyone that disagrees with her, which is, really cool. I didn't find that to be the case with any other Democratic candidate, really. I didn't find, I remember when I was supporting her in New Hampshire, we had the convention, the state convention for the Democrats I think it was in September. It was September or late August or something. And I went to it to hold a sign for her. And so we were out on the lawn in front of the stadium there. And, there were the Bernie people and the Warren people and the Yang people. I'll give them a pass. They're not bad. They are they're all right. But most of the rest of them, they were just a bunch of reptiles. It was terrible. And across the street, there was this guy with a tow truck that just had Trump signs, Israel signs, like deport them all, build the wall, like all these signs or whatever. And of course, it was getting reactions from all the liberals. They were freaking out, and they were walking by him, like calling him a Nazi and screaming at him. And so, I was wearing a Tulsi shirt, and I walked across the street, and this was back before coronavirus, obviously. And I shook his hand, and I was like, hey, I'm proud of you that you're out here, practicing your First Amendment rights, even though you're in an area where your message isn't welcome. You're at the Democratic convention, and you've got all this stuff. And so I just asked him, like, tell me about yourself. Like, what's your deal? And he was a business owner. He owned a towing business, and we talked for a while, and then we got into the issues. And instead of just telling him he was wrong about Israel, or he was wrong about whatever, like building a wall or whatever, I talked with him where we agreed. And I told him, hey, I voted Republican in 2016 in the primary. And, I come from a conservative family. I own guns, but we went down that road, just trying to build common ground. And then eventually we got to some of the disagreements. And then at the end of the conversation, he said, you're the only guy who came over and talked to me like a human. Everyone else is calling me a fascist or yelling at me or screaming at me. And he asked me for my Tulsi brochure that I had because he wanted to find out more about her. So that moment really stuck with me. And it really gave me a lot of vitriol toward that Democratic Party attitude that they had of just like exclusion. But I've seen that in the Libertarian Party too, and it really, really makes me angry. I mean, I think libertarians have to stand for their principles and they shouldn't pander to the right or the left. But the way they treat people who think differently than them really bothers me. So I just wanted your insight as to the supporters of the different groups you went into. What similarities did you see? What really turned you off, or what made you impressed by different people you met?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of probably even more from just a straight conservative background, although, I've veered in the past over to, like Campaign for Liberty and things, organizations like that. I'm thinking maybe you can take over the Republican Party being a libertarian Republican, if that's a thing, like a Rand Paul type character. Maybe Mike Lee has some of those qualities. I'm not sure about him. Obviously, Thomas Massey is probably the best example of that. Yep. And Justin Amash, who left. But I'll say this about Justin Amash, and this is one thing, and this kind of ties into what you're asking here, is that you're going to impeach Trump, right? You're not going to endear yourself to folks that at the end of it all, after the dust clears and they realize it's pretty much just using impeachment for political purposes rather than following the Constitution. And I'm not saying Amash, his reasons for doing it were more constitutional than anything else, but it still seemed a little bit, I don't know if the word's petty or at the end of it all, the Trump people are, and they're everywhere where I live. The Trump people, I mean, this place was like 70-30 for Trump where I live. So I meet them, and they are for the most part, very nice people. They're not fascists. They attend a church. They donate lots of money to charity. They're respectful. They obviously they get a little high strung when you start talking about liberals as that's the key phrase. They don't really delineate between, say, a neoliberal and a hardcore progressive, which I think are different things. I probably have more in common with a real true progressive than a neoliberal, for sure. And I found common ground with some of those progressive folks. But to talk about what your question is here, I haven't had good interactions with those people. If I say something like, do you think you should ban all firearms to somebody? And they're like, of course. I mean, only cops should have firearms, but aren't you defunding the police? So where are we going to get our, you start to go down these roads to try to figure things out, and it escalates. It happened to me on Twitter a lot last summer, where something would just blow up and F-bombs are coming from me and from them. And I'm like, I'm not supposed to be swearing. I kind of try to keep it clean here, but I'm like grabbing the keyboard, like it just steam coming off my head. So I didn't have a really good time interacting, and it's very rigid. It's very like, okay, it's our way, and you're they have words like, if you deny climate change, like you're a denier. It's like you're, and they go into that fascist thing, and then racist, obviously, and then you're just sitting there going, I'm none of those things. I'm just trying to figure this out like you. But, so you look at the Democrats, like I said at the beginning, probably my least favorite group of folks are what I would call garden variety Democrats, the kind that supposedly elected Joe Biden, right? Those are the people that I think do the most harm, are the most dangerous to the country. They don't look for, like in Texas, they're just glad it's happening to Texas. They're not saying things like, maybe those wind turbines, aren't a good idea. Maybe it's not ready for prime time. I'm not against wind power. And I mean, most libertarians are for all kinds of free market and inventive solutions to problems. But when you say to somebody, hey, it's the wind power, they go, oh no, we need more of this. Like, we need more. Tell the people who are dying in Texas from the cold that they need more wind power right now. And this is kind of the blockage that is there between a certain group of Democrats and, reality. We'll just say it like that. Libertarians can be a little snobby. The ones that I've met, especially early on, who I wasn't a registered libertarian or anything, but I was dabbling in some of the ideas, and I was getting a lot of content online and reading and doing things that I hadn't done in a while. And it's actually really enjoyable when you learn something and you're set straight on something, or at least you have a different perspective. And those people, there's one guy I encountered, and I think you saw that on Twitter.
Oh yeah, I know who he is.
Just was like, this party's never going to grow. It's not going to, this movement, if you want to call it a movement or a party, I would say it's both. And I think people have to take it seriously and go, maybe I should read, because it's going to show the two major political parties that they're not the only games in town. If we're going to change this, Republicans might split into two factions. The Democrats might split into two factions. We have one unified faction ready to battle those sort of decimated factions. We could just come out of nowhere and all of a sudden be a major political force. Maybe not right away, but I will say this, the level of tyranny that we're seeing, if we don't, I think, get on board with some of these big ticket items, as I like to say, we're going to find ourselves in an authoritarian place. We're seeing it in different states around the country. And obviously I'm referring to the lockdowns, but I'm also referring to the central banking system, and the corporate structure, which Facebook is now more powerful than a country. All right. Mm-hmm. And they've gotten every benefit from our current government that you can imagine. I mean, they literally shut Australia down with communications from Facebook. So if you don't think that is a problem, and our government is, looking the other way, this is an American company that's acting like its own sovereign nation, basically, in some ways. Mm-hmm. So these are things that really concern me. And this is why progressives who care about, like the Jimmy Dore, Kim Iverson faction over there, but then there's so many Republicans too, who have been bait and switched over the years. Like, yes, I'm for liberty, I'm for freedom. And then at the end of it all, you're like, you're locking me down just like the Democrats are. Right. You just are doing it in a lighter way. I mean, I have a pretty good governor. I'm not going to complain about DeSantis and Kristi Noel. I think her name is in South Dakota. I think, and Tom Woods touched on this a little bit. That's two out of, 50. So, we could use some liberty-minded people who running for office just saying, hey, here's my platform. I want to open businesses. I want real science. I don't want manufactured consent. I want people to make their own decisions about vaccines and masks and everything else that's happened over the last year. And that's what I'm running on. And then some of the other issues, we could talk about taxation, regulations, and certain things where Republicans are supposed to be good, and they end up again just being a somewhat better at times, maybe version than. I mean, some of these Democrats are insane, so I can't say that the Republicans aren't better in some areas. But what I'm finding out is it's basically the lesser, that whole lesser of two evils thing. And rather than have that, not have the best candidate possible. So just to finish answering your question, dabbling the Green Party, I noticed that there were a lot of authoritarians and Trump derangement syndrome people in that movement who were more focused on Trump than, say, getting their Bernie progressive agenda through. We have to stop Trump from tweeting. Okay, well, that has nothing to do with your platform. I mean, I want more speech. I don't want less speech. I want more speech. And I'm worried that your speech, because you believe, say, in the Second Amendment, or you believe in just certain precepts within the party, that you're going to be deemed, a hater, and you're going to need to be shut down. We can't hear you. This is the thing that's happening across America. And again, this is another issue that the Libertarian Party, of all parties, the First Amendment, free speech, They should be like, we are the free. You could run an ad campaign. Here's the party that's actually the free speech champions in the country. First Amendment. We haven't even gotten to the Second Amendment yet, all right? But you got the first two, and you'd have flocks of progressives, maybe. See, this is the problem, because then they hear, oh, you're for the Second Amendment too? Crap. You know? Right. So, and then it goes on, like, you're for the 10th, or whatever amendment, like, yeah, I think the power should go back locally. I think we should shut down the Department of Education, and their heads just explode.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so, that's why I think if we want to win, you actually did a great video on this the other day. You came up with 6 issues that libertarians should run on. And I agree. I think even if it's like 3, I mean, but trying to, I mean, because like you said, once the libertarian philosophy is radical, in my mind, it shouldn't be perceived as radical, because what the government is doing is really what's radical, and we just want to stop it. But people are so used to the government doing everything that it's doing that when the message is presented, it is radical. But if we could run on like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 issues that really resonate with the people, then we can win. And that's what populism is, resonating with the people. We were going to talk about this too. Populism, the word, just like progressive or conservative or liberal, they don't even mean their original definitions to most people anymore. Like, a lot of libertarians think populism means lying to people, basically, or blaming their problems on something other than the actual deal. And admittedly, populists can do that sometimes. You know, sometimes you have populists like Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, who, in my opinion, are not telling the whole truth about why the problems exist. So, okay, that's not good. But Ron Paul was a populist in my mind. He was resonating with the people of the time, telling them the issues that were destroying the country, destroying the monetary system, taking their rights away, and he was going to put a stop to it. That's populism. And we have to become a populist party if we want to win. And that doesn't mean you have to lie. You can always tell the truth and be populist. So sometimes you can't be populist in your message. Sometimes you got to say, hey, sorry guys, this is partly your fault too. Like, this isn't all going to just fix itself if we take out the warmongers and the statists. Like, we've got to do our part too. Like, there is that part of a true message that is hard to sell sometimes, but the parts where that is the issue, that, you know, they're destroying our currency and they're draining us with all these wars and they're destroying the economy with all the lockdowns, that's all populist messaging, and we should be embracing that. But I know you wanted to talk about this, what you think populism really is versus what people frame it as, and how libertarians, like, they just cringe when they hear the word, and it's a word that they need to adopt, or a style they need to adopt, at least if they ever want to win, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, the good instincts that, say, Trump had about, you know, the war, bringing troops home and talking a good game, believe me, I remember that 2016 campaign. That was resonating with people that were showing up for those events. Like, hey, these wars, remember he said stuff like, these wars are stupid. All right. I mean, again, the clumsy Donald Trump language still resonated because nobody was saying that other than maybe, you know, the libertarian candidate, which you weren't going to hear from, you know. I mean, you heard from Gary Johnson, and Gary Johnson, I don't even get into that, but I mean, he had so many opportunities, Hillary versus Trump. And, you know, I know he got a lot of votes, but there were so many more opportunities. And let's get to the populism thing though. Populism has a good image right now, and the Libertarian Party seems to almost want to segregate and say, no, we don't want those people, you know, like the Trump deplorables, for instance. We don't want those people have nothing right now. I mean, even if Trump stays involved in politics and his family, and these are things that the libertarians have to consider as well, that running somebody who, finding somebody who can be persuasive, who has a little bit of star power and those qualities to maybe get people to go, hey, not only is this guy interesting and funny and relatable, but he also knows these issues really well. I think the Trump crowd, even though they love him like a messiah type character, they know that, he's at times he just doesn't, he's not articulate. He's clumsy with his language. There's some people that like him for that too. So, I have to be careful not to alienate those people, the plain spoken group or whatever you want to call it. But that's where the populism comes in, is that this guy is finally talking to the working class. The only reason Trump won in 2016 is because he went to Michigan and he said, you know what, I'm for you guys. I'm tired of your jobs going overseas. And, libertarians might have a different point of view on even that whole idea of trying to keep certain American jobs here. Is that the government's job to facilitate that? But it has been the government's job over the last 30, 40 years to facilitate those jobs leaving. So again, This is where libertarians might kind of maybe, you talk a little bit about sort of maybe not going, full 100% on this one issue. Maybe you take it back, dial it back a little bit and understand that, you can't just, like John Kerry said the other day, hey, you guys, you can make solar panels. I'm sorry about your, your coal plants or your pipelines. I'm really sorry about that, but just go get a job that pays 1/3 what you're making and see if you can survive, and somebody will maybe train you and the government will provide you. Well, again, the government, their job isn't to pick winners and losers. So even in this idea of populism and libertarianism, you need to be able to explain to the people who are listening, who are finally, here comes a different message too, because you're not a neoliberal, you're not a neoconservative, and if it's Mitch McConnell or it's Chuck Schumer, it's the same lane. It's just two different sides of the same coin. You have an opportunity to say something completely new, unique, educational, and different. Now, that's a tough thing to be able to do, and that's why this party's been around for 50 years and has made only kind of minor inroads into this, that and the fact that all 50 states are basically trying to block libertarian candidates in one way or another. But we're in a new time, Reed. We're in a time where both parties, I think, are on the edge of implosion if they continue to keep doing what they're doing. And the libertarians should be there to field, hey, here comes some populists. They were Trump supporters, or they were just garden variety Republicans who like their country, who have families, who work for a living, who aren't looking for the government to solve all their problems. Boom, I got 4 right there. Okay. Liking the American flag is not jingoism. Okay. Liking your town, being familiar with your founding fathers or with your history as a country is not racist. Okay. And these are the things, I think the libertarians made a mistake last year when they were kind of pandering hard after the whole George Floyd thing, at just kind of like saying to the progressives and all those neoliberal Democrats that, hey, we understand these people over here are all haters. And all those people are like, hey, we didn't do anything. We disagree with this too. We didn't like the way that went down too. But to brand us all in that category and to kind of put up a campaign that says, hey, I'm with her. That's the Hillary Clinton, a campaign slogan. And believe me, people had a lot of visceral reactions to that. And it's up to guys like you, actually, who are making an effort, and me up to some degree, to change this, to say, that's poor messaging. You're out there on the road with other working class people making deliveries, making stops. You see the average, blue collar flyover country person and how disconnected they are from what's happening in DC or the media. That's another issue that we need to have, because you're never going to get a libertarian on any of these media platforms, these mainstream platforms, because they're going to throw bombs at everybody because they're equal opportunity offenders. And whether it's the nonstop wars or it's economic policy. They don't want to hear those arguments. They just want to go back to, as one Democrat said, we just want to go back to eating brunch. You know, we don't have to worry about Trump and his craziness. We just want to go back. And that's why we have Joe Biden, supposedly. And again, I have other theories as to why we have Joe Biden, but just we'll go by, you know, the YouTube standard. We have Joe Biden right now because people wanted to get back to norms. They wanted to get back to the status quo. And we are positioned to pick up a lot of support from populists, from conservatives who didn't know they were libertarians, because there's a lot of those, and probably a few progressives that will hold their nose on some of the economic things to get their civil liberties back. So that's, you know, as far as the whole message of populism and libertarianism, they're not necessarily oil and water. And that's when you go on Twitter, it's like, oh, we don't want any populists. Those populists, those are the bottom of the shoe. You know, we don't want those people invading our nice little clique that we have here. And if it's going to be a serious political movement, you want populists, you want conservatives, you want the biggest group of people in the country, independents, not represented pretty much in every state. There are more registered independents than at least one of the two parties, if not the two parties combined in some places. So you've got to convince those independents that, hey, libertarians, we're truly, or even better, get them to join the LP and say, you know what, you've got a home here. We're going to leave you alone. You know, for those of you who have different ideas about religion, different ideas about cultural issues, we accept you. We're going to have a big tent. We're not going to, you know, but we're not going to brand you as like, if you're pro-life or pro-choice, we're not going to, you know, brand you either way. I'm more, you know, interested in life, and I kind of believe in the Ron Paul philosophy on that, and that's kind of where my faith teaches and so forth. And there are a lot of people that you could awaken who have given up and said, yeah, neither one of these parties really represents me. But you got to do it with tact. You can't get angry. You got to use like logic, and you got to love people too to some degree. I hate to use the L word, but you can't hate on everybody that comes along and says, "Hey, I'd like to be a libertarian." I remember that happened to me. I'm thinking about you're not a libertarian. You're just a Trump supporter. You're a crazy conservative. You're a Tulsi supporter. She's a progressive, for God's sake. Get away. It's like, oh, okay, I'll just go back. I think I had that reaction one day, like, I'm just getting off this damn Twitter roller coaster and, you know, gonna have a nice cup of tea and just chill for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to talk about Jo Jorgensen because I haven't talked a lot about her. And I have receipts from my videos. If anyone wants to go back and watch, I was focused on Congress way more than the presidential campaign. I had, I don't know, like 10 people on who were running for Congress. I was really upset how the Libertarian Party was putting so much effort into a presidential campaign that they knew they couldn't win, and they probably knew couldn't break 5%. I mean, and you had people in races like Ricky Harrington in Arkansas, or Brad Barron in Kentucky, or Donald Rainwater, I think in Indiana. You know, those were like races where you could have an impact, and they were coming on my show when I had, you know, I was getting like 40 views per video or whatever. Like, that's not good. They should be going on Fox News or whatever. I mean, it was terrible. But I agree with you on the overall messaging of the Jorgensen campaign. And I know Spike Cohen pretty well. And I think Spike Cohen's pretty great. His messaging is pretty on point. But yeah, the Jorgensen campaign really fell flat. And I think they had an opportunity to be the sane voice, you know, and they jumped too much into the left lane. Like, there's nothing wrong. And I mean, I went to a protest, but when I was at the protest, I never said Black Lives Matter just because, I mean, I don't personally have an issue with that statement because I don't think it's exclusionary, but I understand all the connotations that come with making it about race instead of making it about police reform. So when I was there, I was very explicit that I'm only here talking about reforms we need to the policing system. I'm not going to be here to fuel the race war. And I think they really dropped the ball there. And, I had Dave Smith on my show about a week ago, and I was originally like really critical of him for how much he lambasted Joe Jorgensen. But I'm starting to see his point of view, because people like you, and you're definitely not the only one, lots of people, that was their only exposure to the Libertarian Party. And they're like, wow, I want nothing to do with this. And he was there saying, no, don't go away. This isn't everything about libertarianism. Like libertarianism is about being better than the right and the left. It's about rising above the culture war and showing us what the real problems are. So I think that really has to be the messaging going forward, because there's still a lot of culture war going on right now. And instead of feeding into it and piggybacking on, you can piggyback onto left-wing causes or right-wing causes when they're attacking the other side, but you can't just be like, hey, they both suck. Like I don't like either one of them. And this is what I think the problem is. And this is what we need to fix. This is what the problem is with the country. And that's how you can get the sane people, because there are conservatives that you won't get. Like there are hardcore Sean Hannity idiots out there that you're just not going to reach. And then the same on the left, there are the Rachel Maddow people, but then there are also the Sean King people. I don't think you can reach them either. There's this idea that, the neoliberal left is horrible, but there is this facet of the hard left that is also horrible that you're not going to reach. It is like that group of like Yang supporters and Tulsi supporters that you can really get to. It's weird. There's like this moderate left and hard left, and then there's somewhere in between that's kind of fluid. Those are really the people you can get to. So we need to stop. I don't think the Libertarian Party has an issue with pandering to Sean Hannity supporters. Yeah. But there might be an issue with trying to pander to Sean King supporters, and that I don't think that's a smart move. I think it's standing for what you believe in and showing that both sides have lost it and that we have solutions. That's what we got to do if we want to win.
Yeah. Well, again, what's interesting about the libertarian philosophy, though, if the libertarians truly believe in the United States Constitution, and that's one thing that I think it does rattle the left way more than the right, because the left, I think, if they had their way, they would dismantle the Constitution or a good chunk of it. And I'm not saying that as like a sort of fallen off the wagon conservative type guy. You can see it. You can see their reactions to when people say, hey, the Second Amendment, remember that post you did on Twitter about, how many rounds, whatever it was. And you were clearly doing you were trolling, and it was kind of humorous that even people who claim to be libertarians were freaking out, or people who believe in the second, whoever. So it's communicating the message of libertarianism to me is far easier to convince, say, your conservative friends about, for instance, like endless war. Like you talk about Sean Hannity and even the late Rush Limbaugh, who just passed away. I think Limbaugh was an important figure in starting conversations, and he did save talk radio. There's a lot of good things that Limbaugh did, but he was a conservative tribalist. In other words, George Bush, when he was the president, I remember listening to Rush Limbaugh and, weapons of mass destruction, Bush, let's do this. 15 years later, George W. Bush is basically an ass, but he was an ass then, Rush. That's the thing that, not to throw dirt on the guy's grave or anything, but it's the tribalism of a guy like Hannity and Limbaugh. That's an obvious thing, and maybe throw Glenn Beck in there, although Beck tends to be, he can be a little on the libertarian side. Yeah,
Yeah.
he gives up on it sometimes. He says, maybe I should just be a libertarian. I'm like, do it. You'd have all
Yeah.
these followers. Imagine the impact he would have if he would just do it. But then there are guys like Tucker Carlson, who I think is kind of like a closet libertarian in some ways. I mean, there are times where I don't agree with him, but he's really ticked off at things like the surveillance state, like the fact that, there's cameras everywhere and we're being watched, and it doesn't seem like the Republicans really care. It doesn't seem like the Democrats really care. In fact, the Democrats are hoping to use it, against, in Bush, that was the thing, Patriot Act. And do you think Biden's going to get in there and repeal the Patriot Act? No, they love that. This is one big long cabal. But my point is that I think conservatives, a lot of them that believe in these liberty issues, and maybe there were the 5 that I put in my video. I can't remember which 5 I did, but I picked out the 5 that I think both sides could probably agree on. I think it's like low-hanging fruit at this point, because people who voted for Biden apparently already have buyer's remorse. You cancel the pipeline. What'd you think was going to happen? You think we were going to gain jobs canceling the pipeline? I mean, these people don't think things through. And then they say, well, it's better for the environment. Then you immediately just shoot that down and say, no, because they're going to put the same oil on trucks and cart it from Canada down through the United States. So how is that better? Nobody thinks through anything, Reed, anymore. Nobody thinks of like the ramifications of a policy, like a real policy. Like we're just going to, one thing that I think the libertarians are going to have to address is immigration at some point. That's an issue that I think the libertarians have been branded as open borders. And that, I think, feeds into like cheap labor, which is right up the Chamber of Commerce and all these corporations that are trying to exploit labor instead of try to hire really good people and pay them what they're worth. I know, again, it's a free market principle. People come in, you have a need, you put these people to work, okay? But to me, it's kind of like a national security issue. Everybody's worried about COVID, but we're just letting people in, and we're not, going to test them to see if they have COVID when they cross the border and so forth. It's a little bit ironic. The authoritarian party that's telling you, stay in your house. But in the meantime, hey, we're just going to knock this fence down. That's an issue. I'll call it a populist issue. But it's a divisive issue, because if people on their, just on a whim, if you tell them, well, we're for open borders, or we're for free flow of immigrants and so forth, and we don't want to, brand people as, an illegal immigrant and so forth. That to me is an issue that I think would be a loser if it's taken. I think it's one of the reasons Trump won the election, at least the first time around, is because he was willing to kind of protect American sovereignty, American jobs. And I'm not for just, tearing the fence down. I think we should have a streamlined, better, more humane immigration system, but I don't think you just knock the wall down.
Yeah, let me speak to that. And I want to use a general metaphor to describe what I'm about to say. If you're a truck salesman and you're selling the same truck everywhere, it's an F-350 four-wheel drive diesel or something, you are selling the same product all the time, but depending on what setting you're in, you're going to emphasize different parts of that truck, right? So if you're selling it in a subdivision in LA where some guy's going to use it to go back and forth to work, you're probably going to talk about the storage capabilities it has, or, the sunroof or whatever. Whereas if you're selling it to some logger in Idaho, you're going to talk more about its off-road capabilities, the torque it has, those types of things. So you're not lying at all about your product, but you're realizing who your customer is and what is going to resonate with them. So that's just kind of touching on what you were talking about earlier with Jimmy Dore, Tucker Carlson. There are parts of libertarianism that appeal to both of those guys.
Yeah.
But you don't have to emphasize the part that doesn't appeal to them when you're talking to them. I mean, if they ask you about it, just like if you're selling that truck and the guy in LA asks you about the torque, you're not going to lie to him, or you're not going to tell him it's great on gas, because it's not, it's an F-350 or whatever. You're going to tell the truth, but you're not going to emphasize parts of those messages. So I think immigration's a great example. And I would tie it to the welfare state. So, letting idealism destroy progress is bad, right? And libertarians suck at this. They have an ideal that they want to reach, and they don't want small steps in that direction. And they also present everything as all or nothing, right?
Right.
So right now, in my opinion, is not the time to eliminate welfare for people who need it. It's time to destroy the corporate welfare, get rid of the Federal Reserve, stop the bank bailouts, stop the corporate bailouts. And then we can talk about streamlining the current welfare system, right? And then we can get to that. With me, it's the same thing with immigration. Like, yes, I think we should abolish ICE. And I think that we shouldn't have checkpoints 100 miles from the border where they can just pull you over and arrest you for no reason, basically. I think that type of stuff has to go. But the open borders is an ideal, right? Like, that would be the ideal we could eventually reach. That's also with the ideal of the welfare state not existing anymore, because you can't have a welfare state with open borders. And so a lot of libertarians are missing that both of those things are ideals. Both open borders and the welfare state being gone are ideals. So presenting ideals as the immediate solution is not always smart, especially because, as you said, you've got a population that you have to appeal to. Right now, completely opening the borders, I mean, it's a weird message to push. Like, why? I mean, we can't even go to Canada, but you want to talk about just opening up the Mexican border. Like, okay. So I agree with you. I mean, the message to have is fixing the system. I don't think ICE serves any good purpose to me. They're the American Gestapo, basically. They can just do whatever they want. I think they've got to go. And I think we should not be separating kids from their families, putting them in cages. That's terrible. Like, the obvious terrible stuff has got to go. But it's completely abolishing everything right away, to me, is the same approach as saying, okay, day one, libertarian presidency, we're getting rid of food stamps. We're just zucking it. Like, everyone would be like, what are you talking about? Like, you can't just do that on day one. You've got to start from the top and work down. I think the same way about immigration. So I do, in an ideal state, think that we could have open borders. If there's no welfare state, I think that in general, the border security apparatus has been an excuse for authoritarianism. That's why we have things like ICE, and that's why they can detain you on the side of the road or pull you over in Arizona if your skin was a certain shade. I mean, there is a lot of like screwed up stuff that came as a result of protecting the border. But I agree with you that just introducing like an instant idea that we're just going to tear the fence down and let everyone in, it's not tailored to the times. First of all, I don't see why that is I don't see why that would be a priority right now. And I also think that presenting the ideal as the immediate solution is just as dumb as doing it with the welfare state. I will say, though, Biden is definitely not for open borders. I don't know if you saw, but his whole moratorium on deportations for the first 100 days, he just turned his back on that. And he was just, he's not going to abolish ICE. He's already said that. He just laid out their priorities for 2021. So it's funny because Sean Hannity, I think the other day, he was saying like, they've got this far left-wing open borders agenda. This is what has been amazing about Trump and Biden to me. To me, they're like, in my lifetime at least, they're the two like most similar people who have ever run for president. But the media has convinced us that they're so different, that Trump was like a far right-wing extremist, deficit hawk, constitutional absolutist. I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, he kind of legislated like Mitch McConnell in my mind, but then Biden, we're supposed to buy him as like this far left, it's socialist who wants to defund the police and open the borders. And it's just amazing that they've created such an imaginary spread between the two people when there were some differences, but for the most part, they kind of have the same, they believe in the same institutions. And so, it is interesting seeing everyone react to the open borders policy that Biden has when he just laid out the objectives for deportations and, ICE. It's just funny, but.
Well, and you raise a good point. There's a lot of, call it gaslighting or stuff that goes on. It's the tribal stuff and the stuff that I think pretty much everybody who's tired of the system, the media, and the way, they loved having Trump as president because they could just pound on him all day. They don't like having Biden as president as much, the media, because Biden is in his bunker most of the day and he's not shooting his mouth off and he's not tweeting and he's not bombastic. In fact, if he's like upright, that's like a big deal for Joe Biden for the day. It's a fact, and these people are and they're covering up that. What I worry about with Biden is he is so fragile. You had Kamala Harris, I guess, calling other countries the other day, just to touch base because nobody's called them yet since they installed these two. So I guess they were probably waiting for here Joe, and it's like Kamala's on the other end, and we knew that was coming. That wasn't a surprise to anybody. But with Trump, for instance, and his war policy, Trump or his supporters or Trump's media surrogates, they did a really good job at telling people, hey, he's better. He's better on this. His rhetoric was better. But, when you really dig into what actually occurred, you had genocide, right, in Yemen. You had a lot of things that were happening because Trump was kind of like, hey, I like Saudi Arabia. They're cool. And we have Tulsi Gabbard's famous statement on what really is America first. And that wasn't. And you can go down the list. You're right. The thing that I worry about with the border is that I don't think it's kind of like your house. It's like if people are coming into your house, you don't know who they are, where they're coming from, what kind of stuff they're bringing with them. If they're, is it a drug cartel or is it like just a family fleeing asylum? And I think we need to have a discreet, maybe somewhat more porous border with some type of I would call it, I mean, I'm not big into, especially in the age of data collection, which we're in, but it would kind of, I think, serve the population. And it isn't the surveillance state. It's just like, hey, why are you here? What's going on? Who are you? That kind of thing. And I think most Americans on both the left and the right and maybe in some libertarian circles would say that that is acceptable. It's not that much to ask. I know there's so
like here open borders. A lot of people think that means literally no process for coming in. Like right. I mean, but we sort of have open borders with Canada. I mean, you still got to show your passport and your driver's license when you go in. They just don't have this Leviathan police state, running through the woods, making sure you're not going over. So the wall is already existent, like between El Paso or there's a fence at least between El Paso and Juarez, Mexico, or Tijuana and San Diego. Like, sure. I mean, I don't see the value in going and ripping it down. I just think that, trying to build a wall all the way across the Texas border, I mean, that's crazy. And then, trying to find all these people and deport them, or it has been used as an excuse to violate civil liberties. But to go back to my original point, I mean, if we don't end the war on drugs and we open the border, that's an issue, right? I mean, this all has to do with how you dismantle things. So, I think, if you destroy welfare, but you keep corporate welfare and you keep the war machine raging, you haven't accomplished a damn thing. Like that to me is not a win. If we remove Mary's food stamp program that she's getting, but we're still bombing Afghanistan and we're still bailing out Freddie Mae, what have we accomplished? So the border fits into that puzzle of what we need to fix. Like, we do need to end the war on drugs. We need to end, we need to eventually at least lessen the welfare state or streamline it or something. So,
decentralize it anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, libertarians, they've got to think strategically. Just because you hammer home one thing does not mean you've really accomplished anything. It's like playing Jenga. You've got to be strategic about how you're pulling the blocks out and moving them, or the whole thing's just going to fall over. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's libertarian philosophy really needs to gain priorities. And if you got anyone who's watching, go check out that video I did with Dave Smith. I have one clip I pulled out called Dave Smith on the Mises Caucus. I would just watch that clip. And I 100% agree with him that we need to focus on the central issues, or as you say, the big ticket items. And once people realize that we're right on those issues, then we can start expounding on the other issues and moving in the right direction. But yeah, like, if we accomplished 100% open borders right now, I mean, you get a couple wins, like you get rid of ICE and you get rid of the kids in cages, but then you have a whole new issue that you weren't prepared for, because the rest of the system has not been deconstructed to the point where you aren't creating a problem anymore, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, because the logic that you used there was really good about the welfare system. If you've got this really good welfare system, of course people are going to rush the border, right? They're gonna want to get in. Their countries are falling apart. And by the way, there might be a reason that's related to United States foreign policy as to why their country is falling apart. Now, this isn't stuff you're going to hear in the mainstream media ever. Why are all these people from Nicaragua? What's going on there? Well, do a little research and find out, the sanctions or some of the things that we may or may not have done, but there's a good chance that some of our foreign policy might be creating the problems in South America. And, we could, if we're going to throw foreign aid around, which we tend to do, and I wish we wouldn't do. And I think most libertarians, probably a lot of conservatives, some Democrats, though, foreign aid is like, oh boy, we can placate the country, just give them a bunch of money.
Democrats should know that we give 7 times the amount of foreign aid to Israel that we do to the next country in line. And if you liberal Democrats love what Israel's doing with our money, then you might want to reassess your values a little bit.
Yeah. So. And that, there are a lot of, Christians that I know, and they're just this blind spot because it's Israel, right. And, we're God's chosen people. And so, yes, we need to bless them. Well, we can bless them. We can bless them. We don't have to have our tax money bless them. We can just support them, however other way you want to do. But it is a weird.
I would tell those Christians, I think Israel has a free healthcare system that funds abortions. So your tax dollars are funding abortions in Israel. That would just be something for those Christians to think about.
That's actually a really good angle. That's a really good. But it's this whole, again, sort of, they're the chosen people. And even though one of the things I say, this gets too religious, but it's like, are they following Jesus? I don't remember them following Jesus. I thought they're still waiting for that Messiah to show up. So I know it's called, I'm getting into the weeds here, but that's like replacement theology. And you can't say that because you're supposed to take everything literally and so forth. So anyway, it does matter to some conservatives and maybe even a few libertarians. But I noticed that that's a huge blind spot, that we're just like, free money, and we just give a free pass to whatever they want to do. Trump set that policy up, but pretty much every president, Obama was reluctant, but he was still doing it. And Biden, he's right there with it. So
Biden,
go ahead.
Yeah, Antony Blinken, the new Secretary of State, he said that I forget his exact words, but I'm going to paraphrase him. We're going to support Israel no matter what they do, is basically what he said. So have we really replaced Mike Pompeo? I don't think so.
No. And look, those guys just running the same playbook, because I'm just going to be honest, Hollywood, New York, there's the apparatus that, and I don't want to be all, I'm not trying to be anti-Semitic or anything like that, but it seems as though there are a lot of powerful people that don't want that policy to change, right? And it's people like you and I who sit here and go, okay, we're not Hollywood movie producers, we're not on a newscast, we're not famous, we're not whoever. But it seems when you see some of that, I see that a lot on Twitter, by the way, and these are things I wouldn't say out loud, but I hear it and I go, yeah, I hate to say it, but that's kind of right. You know, it's kind of correct. And we've got to like kind of start to see above these old alliances that don't serve. This goes back to the populist argument. Okay, people are being convinced to give their money away against their own economic interests because they're being told something every day that's not even true. I mean, if any country can fend for themselves, right, Israel would be close to the top of that list. I would think. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong. And Dave Smith talks about this a lot on his show. He refers to what you're talking about as the cathedral. And a lot of people, it sounds like tinfoil hat-like or conspiracy, but it does exist. Like there is this overwhelming narrative that isn't just put out by the government. It's also put out by the media. It's also put out by Hollywood, that if you go against, you disappear in a media sense. You know, I had this guy, Ryan Dawson, on my show about a month ago now, and he's a huge Israel critic, and he was deemed an anti-Semite and shut down for hate speech because he doesn't want us giving Israel billions of blank checks every year. You know, so that's what they do. I mean, it's not a government law or policy. It's an unspoken agreement that if you go against this, you will be pushed into the dirt. I'm having Carrie Wedler on Monday night. She is Jewish, but she's a huge critic of Israel. So she's been banned from Twitter. She's been put on government watch lists. I mean, she is like more than just anti-Israel. She's an anarchist, but she hasn't done anything violent. She does nothing but preach peace and mutualism and, you know, Rothbardian philosophy, basically. And because she went against Israel, even though she's Jewish, you know, she's anti-Semitic. So it's there is this like overarching, whatever you want to call it, you know, just narrative that you are not allowed to oppose. And if you do, they'll destroy you. And people have to admit that exists, because it does. I mean, you see people disappear. I can't remember her name, but Gina, whatever her name is, the conservative girl from Star Wars that made that tweet about how you shouldn't dehumanize people. What's her last name? Do you remember? Gina?
I know who you're talking about, and I think I might have even seen that tweet, but I can't remember. You know, that's just old age. I don't know. That's my excuse. You can't use it, so.
Yeah, not yet. But I'd say that's a good wrap on the conversation. So what's your channel direction going forward? I like your channel because you don't go in like one direction. You'll do something on libertarianism one day, and then you'll talk about Tulsi, and then you'll talk about just current events. So what's the general direction you're moving your channel forward, and where can people follow you?
I kind of combined, doing that video about Bruce Springsteen and his courageous Super Bowl ad that got quite a few views, probably because of my other channel, but it wasn't really meant for that. It was really a political message. I do a lot of topics right now that I'm trying to get my audience into more libertarian ideas. I did that 5 things that libertarians should focus on. I will do current events if I do want to tackle lockdowns and so forth. I keep saying I'm going to do it. The reason I'm not doing it is because I'm afraid the video is just going to it'll just get banned or blocked or demonetized, whatever. It's not going to go anywhere. But there's so much information coming out about that. And I keep on the Tulsi watch. I know there's a group of folks that are there to hear about Tulsi. And I'm not going to ever go back to just talking about Tulsi only, even though a lot of people view those videos. I'm more interested in the future. If Tulsi becomes a libertarian, that would be the best of all worlds for me. So Tulsi, if you're watching this, Tulsi, and you want to become a libertarian, we urge you both. Reed and I both think that you would be a great libertarian. You can find my channel. It's The Political Refugee on YouTube, and I am on Twitter as well as The Political Refugee, and have been now for at least a couple of months. So I'm sticking to it.
All right, guys. Well, go follow both of us on Twitter. I've got our names at the bottom of the stream, at Reed Coverdale, at David Spuria. Dave, thanks for coming on. We'll do it again.
Thanks, Reed.